Okay, so what I'd like to talk about today is tuning up your remote teaching. I'm going to share a few strategies that I have shared before, but then I'm also going to add some new ones and some tweaks to old ones in here that might help you to just create a more engaging experience for students and also for yourself to make sure that you're not feeling despair in your remote sessions if you're having trouble getting students to engage. I always like to start with a little caveat that remote is not the same as online. When I'm talking about remote teaching, I'm talking about classes where you do meet synchronously at a scheduled time, utilizing a virtual meeting, whereas online classes are mostly asynchronous. They don't meet at scheduled times, and they primarily take place in a learning management system like Canvas, Brightspace, Moodle, or Blackboard. So I'm going to focus today just on this remote teaching experience. So I always like to point out that remote teaching should be in your teaching tool belt. In fact, this year has created an unprecedented movement forward, I think, in remote teaching. I've been teaching remotely for about a decade. I started doing it when I would go to conferences. I did a lot of speaking outside of my teaching career, and that caused me to have to travel to a lot of places. I didn't want to miss any class. So I started remote teaching about 10 years ago whenever I was away. So I taught from hotel rooms, I taught from hallways, and I used technologies like Zoom and WebEx to make that work for students. I traveled using, and I have for years now, I traveled using a document camera that I could carry in my suitcase. It's that big, right? So I could always share things I was writing, use manipulatives, whatever I needed to teach class. So a lot of the techniques I'm sharing have been kind of honed over years of thinking, well, that didn't work. How should I do it differently, right? But once you have this tool in your teaching tool belt, you can use it all the time, even when we're not in a pandemic, which we hope will be sometime soon. So students have always been unable to come to class. They've had sporting events, they've had illnesses where they're not too sick to sit up and pay attention, but too sick to drive into campus. There have been students who have had just really horrible commutes and they can't always make it in. Some students who get hit harder by snow than others in the winter. A student who may have a sick child at home and can't leave the house. All of these students could always have been helped if you were willing to teach remotely, right? So after I was teaching remotely for about 5 years, just when I was out of town, I started teaching remotely for any student who couldn't make it to class too. I was already using my computer, I was already hooking up my own document camera, and it was actually no extra trouble to also start a Zoom session and bring them into class as well. So even without the pandemic, we were already using all of these techniques, and my students actually experienced no difference in their normal education when we did go into pandemic mode, because they were already used to everything. So this, I think, is providing us an opportunity to learn new things. Of course, it's coming at great pressure and great stress to a lot of us, but as educators, we rarely have the time to, we have all of these very hopeful ideas about how we are going to, change, like, oh, next semester I'm going to do this, or next year I'm going to learn this, or I'm going to take a class on this, but we rarely actually have the time to do it. So it's mostly aspirational. Well, this year it's not aspirational. This year we are under the pressure to change. And what that means is we have this opportunity to actually push ourselves forward into a new space, into new techniques. And a lot of these are frankly techniques that help in an in-person classroom as well. So I think what we learn from teaching remotely will carry over into much better in-person classroom spaces as well. And I'm really excited about that. So remote teaching is very similar to face-to-face teaching. You can see your students, they can see you. You can have small group discussions. You can have large group discussions. You can write on the board just like you would in class. You can have students work in small groups together just like you would in class. You can move between the groups just like you would in class. You can teach with active learning techniques. As a matter of fact, this is what I would recommend you do almost 100% of the time in your remote sessions. If you are not going to be actively doing something in remote sessions, then don't hold them. Don't have them, because you can just record what you were going to do instead. Now, the one thing people have a lot of trouble with remote sessions is this issue of, what if they don't pay attention? How do I know they're paying attention if their cameras are off, or if they're not in the same room with me? I think we especially feel it when their cameras are off. But in the classroom, we might be forgetting and being a little bit too nostalgic about that classroom experience. I don't know about you, but in the classroom, my students often have cell phones near them. They answer texts. They use their laptops, supposedly to take notes, but not always. You know, when I walk around a classroom, even when it's clear I'm walking around the classroom, I can catch students doing things like watching World Cup soccer on their phones, right? I mean, they weren't already paying attention. They were just physically in a classroom with you. Some students pay attention, some don't. It's your job to try to capture their attention, whether it's in the classroom or whether it is remote. So just keep in mind that they might not have been paying attention already. You already had this problem in face-to-face classes. It just feels different because you can't see them. And so you have this fear that they're not paying attention. Well, some of the ones you can see aren't paying attention, and you probably can see that, right? We've probably all had the experience where you have a group of students who have their cameras on, and you could clearly see that one of the students who's muted is talking to somebody who's off the camera, right? I mean, so even if they do have their cameras on, they aren't necessarily paying attention. All you can do is your best to hold their attention. That's all you can do in the classroom as well. And so the more active you make your classroom, the more likely it is that they are paying attention. So I like to start by sharing a technique I use quite a bit. It's very simple, very fast. It's called the 3-2-1 go method. And so we're going to actually practice this method. I'm going to go back a slide just to explain it. So you put up a question and you have everybody type their answer in the chat window, but they don't press enter until you say 3-2-1 go. And then everybody answers at once, so you can see all the answers at the same time. So that we would practice this, I'm going to go ahead and say hi in the chat window just to make it a little easier to find, like that. And now you can find it. I want to have you answer this multiple choice question. You can answer more than one. What gaffes have you now experienced in a remote meeting? Select all that apply. So again, you're going to write down like B and D or C and A or something, but don't press enter until I say 3-2-1 go. 3-2-1 go. Oh, there. Oh, a fire drill. I had a fire drill during class too. That's a good one. I should add that one. So we've all experienced lots of these. I have not experienced somebody without pants yet, but, or no, sorry, I have actually experienced that one. A roommate walked across the screen without pants, underwear, luckily, but I have not experienced someone using a bathroom yet. So I haven't done that one. Let's do one more of these. I want to hear what you're having the most trouble with regarding remote teaching. I'm going to actually put a line across the chat window here to separate the questions and let you respond. Again, don't press enter until I say go. Three, two, one, go. Okay, lots of issues with engaging students, feeling connected to students. So we'll address that in here. Feeling connected, finding time to recreate lesson plans. No kidding. I'm actually team teaching some sections with another teacher. We each have our own sections, but we're sharing the creation of resources. So she writes the problem sets, I make the active learning sets, right? That way we are not all doing double work right now. So if you have that kind of an opportunity, I would take it, you know, go in with a friend to make better materials. So So we'll address things like feeling connected to students who aren't on the camera, getting them to come into class. I'll just mention one thing because I don't think it's in the slides that I do to get them to come to class. I actually give points for the active learning session part of class. So every time they come to an active learning session, that's 10 points. So if they're there and participating, they get 10. If they miss class, we always record it. And they can watch the recording within a week of class, take notes on the recording, like actually try the problems as if they were in class, and send me a copy of their notes. If they do that, they get the 10 points, right? Most students seem to find, I think, that it's easier to just come to class and do it live and more interesting that way. But they have the option of earning the points either way, and that does help quite a bit with the attendance. Also, we layer in more work on the concepts in the active learning portions of class. So they do have videos to watch and notes to take on lectures, but I don't have to, but we will do extra stuff in the active learning. So they generally feel like they get more help, and they're more help that's closer to their problem sets and things like that if they come. So bookkeeping attendance for a large class, I actually just screenshot at some point during the class, the names on the screens. Usually I do it when they're in breakout rooms because they're like nice in a nice little order there. You can do it from participant lists. I try not to do it in class. I'm not keeping careful notes on everybody who responds everywhere. If I have students I'm concerned about, I kind of circle them on my attendance list and keep an eye out for their participation, or make sure to call on them to just double check that they're there. But generally speaking, I'm just mostly making sure students are there and participating some. I do actually keep physical attendance lists rather than doing it. I mean, I eventually put the scores in the LMS, but I'm keeping a physical attendance list next to me so that if somebody leaves, I can make a note of it, or if somebody comes in late, I can make a note of it. But mostly what I'm looking for is, did you come and participate during our active learning time together? But yeah, screenshotting, sometimes if I'm busy, I just screenshot it and do it after class. Or you can get it from the chats, just search the chats to see who participated, that works too. Okay, so another thing I think you can do to like just take a pulse during class, if I'm asking them to work on a question, or I've put a question up on the screen, and I'm just not sure how they're progressing because either I don't have a lot of video on from students, or I can't tell from their video how they're doing. I just say, let's do a temperature check in the chat. Tell me which one you are. You think you've got it? You're on the right track, but maybe not done yet, or you're struggling. And so they just answer in the chat which one they are. That gives me kind of a temperature check on the room. It's probably more accurate than reading faces in a classroom because you're actually hearing from them how they're doing. You can look out in a classroom and see that everybody's working, or that some students are working, so you can probably guess who's struggling, but it's hard to tell the difference between the ones who think they've got it and the ones who are on the right track, but not there yet. Right. So this can give me a sense of, do we need to have more time on this question? Or do we have a lot of students struggling? Should I maybe give a hint on it? And so something as simple as that, where they answer in the chat, can be a nice way to do that. You can also do it with a thumbs up for I think I've got it, a thumbs sideways for on the right track, a thumbs down for I'm struggling, right? So as again, another reason for them to have their camera on. Those who are not on camera can answer in the chat. Those who are on camera can just give me one of the three thumbs to know what's going on. So another thing we can do in remote sessions is small group discussions. I think it's important here to remember what a good structure is for small group discussions, and that is to do something like a think, pair, share, or a TPS. A think, pair, share, you first pose a question and give students time to think independently about it. I often don't even tell them that we're going to go into breakout rooms so that they do individually attempt the problem, because they don't know that they're going to have an opportunity to collaborate. So I give them a problem, I let them try it themselves. Sometimes I'll even see what the current answers are if I know it's going to be somewhat contentious. And then as a result of the answers being varied, I can say, let's do this, let's go to a group and talk about this, right? But if I know it's a problem that has a lot of nuances to it and that some students are going to struggle with some of the details, then I'll make sure to put them in a small group before we discuss together, because a small group can address individual issues better than I can with an entire group. So after they have a chance to think about the problem, then put them into their breakout rooms to work on a problem together. And reach a consensus. And I say you want to reach a consensus in your answers, and you want to make sure that everybody understands all the parts, right? And then when we come back, I might ask a particular group to share. I might share a response, see where there are questions. It depends on the type of problem and how much discussion needs to happen, right? But that is if you skip the think part, the groups rarely work. So if you send students to a group and they need to start the problem in the group, then what's going to happen is that the group is going to be silent for the first several minutes. And once you have silence in a group, it is very difficult for any student to break that silence to talk. It's just like an energy level that's required that many students don't want to do. So what you want to do is always create a situation where the moment they get into the group, somebody starts talking. It helps if you designate somebody to be the sharer in the group, the one who's going to come back to the main group and gather the information from the small group. Okay. Another thing that we can do is use synchronous documents in remote sessions to do things like brainstorm answers, make lists, write responses as a group. So this is just a simple example. Tell me 5 characteristics about this equation, and the students would go to a synchronous document in their small groups and respond. I want to show you an example about that. So we're going to do one called the Watergate brainstorm, and I'm going to share this in the chat window. And what you're going to do is place your cursor somewhere in the bulleted list below, change to your favorite text color, and then add every fact you think you know about the Watergate scandal. No Googling allowed, because what we want to do is know what's currently in your head, okay? So I'm going to share the link in the chat. And so when you get there, just put your cursor somewhere in the list, change your text color if you'd like, just to keep yourself separated, and then start writing down what you think you know about the Watergate scandal. Okay, so hopefully you get the idea. What you can do is actually get all the information from the room of what is current knowledge about something. You can essentially open up the space you want to talk about, right? Whether that's a type of mathematics or a piece of history, or what do you know about writing an essay? What do you know about taking blood? You can take the temperature of where your students are currently at in a document. It works really nicely because you can kind of see everything at once and move the items around and edit it. I just want to share a few tricks about this. So I'm going to jump back over to my PowerPoint and just give you a few tips about how to set these up well. One, you should make sure every student has a place to start on the document without all typing over each other. I think this is a classic mistake that newbies make. They make a document and they give the directions, but there's only one place to place your cursor, and everybody places their cursor in that one place, and then they're all typing over each other, right? So you notice that when you went to this document, I had a whole bunch of bullet points going down the page so that you could jump to some line and start typing. I do think it also helps to have people change colors. Even if 2 people change the same color, you can start to distinguish different people's blocks of writing. And so that helps to keep everybody from being on top of each other. So that works pretty well too. I think it's a lovely activity for things like opening up a topic, or when you know a lot about a topic and you want to see how much they know now, right? So you could do the same exact activity after covering the Watergate scandal and see what they're able to surface up on their own afterwards, right? So it can be kind of fun to see how little you think, everybody kind of knows what Watergate is, but we actually, when you have to come up with facts, we probably don't remember as much as we think we do, right? And then to see if you progress over the course of what you're learning, right? So that's one thing about setup to consider. Another thing is just to prepare all of those documents ahead of time with links so that you can easily share them. So I keep all of my links in little sets of notes so I can easily copy and paste them into Windows. And in particular, you might have to use different documents for different, if there's lots of students in your class, you might need to make different documents for different groups. A nice way to do that is just by last names, where they just go to the document with the correct letters. You can do it with preset groups and give the groups names, things like that. But you do need to create all of those ahead of time, and you probably need to paste the links for those unless you're housing them in an LMS or something like that, because they always go back to the same document. I tend to do them on the fly, so I'm usually pasting them in chat windows. And it's very important the student goes to the document before they kind of check out with you, especially if they're going to work in small groups. So another thing you can do is use synchronous documents for sharing the assignment to groups. One of the problems with small groups is that if you're sharing like a slide on the screen in the main group and they leave to go to the small groups, they don't always see the information that's on the main screen. It just depends on the platform you're in. And sometimes I want them to see a lot of information and I can't actually put it all on one screen. So they're going to need to scroll through it. So in those cases, I create a document that's view only that they can go to in their small group. So one of my favorite examples of this is called You Be the Grader. Each student has to decide how to grade the students that responded to, say, a test question or a problem set. And you tell them how many points the question is worth, and you go through this process. And then in a second, I'm going to share the example with you to look at. So students first, I put up the problem and students have a chance to try it on their own. That's important because you can't grade it unless you know what the right answer should be, right? So the first step is they actually have to try the problem on their own. After that, I share a document with student responses for all the students to pull up, and then I designate a reporter for each breakout room. I'm going to give a little spoiler alert here. What I've started doing lately is always making sure that it's the students who don't have their cameras on who end up being the reporters, because they tend to participate less than the ones who do have their cameras on. So I make sure that they get their chance to be the main instigator of things. So they're the reporter for the breakout rooms. And I'll just say, like, okay, Brenda, Cheryl, Jennifer, you guys are the reporters in these breakout rooms today. So make sure you gather, all the grades you're going to assign to bring back to the main group, right? That kind of puts them in charge. And even if they don't have a camera, they can still kind of run the meeting and make sure they're staying on track, right? So then I separate students into breakout rooms and they can see the documents I have provided. So in this case, let me share it with you. I'm going to put it in the chat. Oops, let's see, put it in the chat. So this is a new example for you to take a look at. This is the You Be the Grader example. There are 3 student responses in that document. And you can see, what I keep repeating: the question and then the student response, the question, the student response. Of course, make up student names so that they're not actually the students who responded. But they need to go through now in their group, now that they've done the problem themselves, and decide, who gets how many points and why, right? And so you can see I can't put this all up in one slide. And so this gives them a chance to look at it in small groups, discuss it in small groups. They really seem to have quite a bit of discussion around these and how many points they should assign. Grading papers seems to really be a sweet spot amongst students for generating discussion. So it's a really fun one to do. And it also, of course, helps them to answer questions better on their own tests and problem sets, because they start to see what they would take off points for, right? And that's pretty cool. So let me go back to the PowerPoint here. One of the things I do when we come back together is I actually kind of keep a little tally myself of, this is Terry, Emily, and Carrie. And this is what groups 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 gave them for points. And then this is what I gave them for points. So I kind of like write down what I would do at the very bottom. And then the groups report back to the whole session like, okay, we gave Terry a 7.5 because blah, blah, blah. Emily got a 10, she did everything right. Carrie got a 5 because of blah, 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 right? And this is like my little grading rubric over here on the right. And then I tell them how I would have graded them and why, so that they can kind of see, you can see I was actually a nicer grader than most of them. especially for Carrie's work here. So it's an interesting activity. It's really quite fun. They seem to enjoy it, and it has a lot of value for a lot of reasons. But in general, that's another type of activity you can use a shared document for, which works really well. Of course, you can also use a document camera to write questions on the fly and share thoughts and responses to things. There was a question in the chat about how I protect my document camera when I'm traveling. I actually have a little case for it. I went to Amazon and bought I think it's called like a sales case. It's like a little case lined with foam. You just cut out with a razor blade the shape of what you're going to put in it. So I have a little case that I stick that in, and I have a little light I carry with me too, in case the light in the room I have is bad. So document cameras are great for just being able to share things on the fly. You can put a book underneath it and show a problem out of a book. You can walk them through how to complete a worksheet. You can share a handwritten solution to something if you need to write out a quick solution. You can demonstrate experiments. You can use manipulatives, all sorts of things that you can do with a document camera once you have one. You can also, if you've never thought of this, turn a document camera sideways. And then once it's sideways, you can like point it at like an experiment or a room or something like that to kind of use it as a video camera in a space. Now, one of the things I've started doing lately, which is really been working well, is to engage students using old-fashioned whiteboards. I started doing it this summer because I had to teach math for elementary teachers, and it was completely remote, right? And so the students bought manipulative kits, but then we also used whiteboards for them to try out a lot of the work and share how they were doing it. And they really took to it. They all started using whiteboards in their own presentations back to the class, and in the videos they created, and many other things. So let me just talk a little bit about that. I started the semester by issuing a whiteboard marker and eraser to each student. You can buy these in large packs. And then my plan is to capture them back from the students before they leave for Thanksgiving, because they're not coming back after Thanksgiving. So I'm just they just have 1 week after that where they take a test. So I'll just ask them to drop them on campus somewhere, and then I will wait 3 weeks and then sterilize them all. So I just actually went to campus with a big suitcase full of whiteboards and materials, and sat in a camp chair with my mask on and hand sanitizer. You can see that as part of my process, and passed out whiteboards and erasers and whatnot. So this is how the students got them. I create slide decks for the active learning portion of class. So I make sure to pre-prepare the types of problems I want to make sure to go through. Some of the questions are multiple choice, some of the questions are free response, and some of the questions they graph on the whiteboards. My whiteboards actually have a graph grid on one side and a plain side on the other. And so I come into class prepared with the questions I want to ask. And sometimes a slide will have the question, and then the answer will be on the next slide if it's something I don't want to fuss around with pulling up on the screen separately. Here's an example of a question, give 8 properties of this function. So that would be one they scribble out on their whiteboards. I might send them to groups to make sure they have a total of 8, and then have somebody come back as the reporter for each group. So these can work really nicely with both the whiteboards and the group activities. Here's another example of a whiteboard activity. I give them a graph and so they draw the original graph, and then we practice with all sorts of graph transformations. And so each time I give them a problem, they draw the new transformation on their graph, tell me where the points are, tell me where the asymptote is. So these are math examples, but there's no reason why you can't use whiteboards in many classes, especially classes where there are problems to do, transactions to write down, sentences to diagram, sentences to write, like in a foreign language class. The whiteboards are nice because they do a couple things for the students. One is it takes their hands off their keyboards, right? And when they take their hands off their keyboards and do something else, they are not futzing around on social media. They're not doing their homework for other classes. They're not chatting with their friends. They have their pen in their hand and they are actually trying something. So I think breaking that connection between them and their computer is actually really valuable for getting them into a thinking space. And it really does help with making sure they stay engaged and are kind of with you in class. You can see them kind of working on their boards and showing you their boards. These students all agreed that I could take a photo of them with their boards. So that's how I got that one. And so then I just ask students to share their boards when I'm ready to see their progress. And then you might think about, well, what about the students who aren't sharing their cameras? And I am going to talk about those guys in a second. There are strategies for having them share as well, even if they aren't sharing their camera. But what's nice about it is, as long as some students are sharing their camera, you're getting a sense of what is going on in the class. You have to assume that of the ones who are not sharing their camera, some of them are at the same pace as every one of the students who is sharing their camera. So you've got some students sharing their camera who have fallen behind, some who are sharing their camera who are, really fast, and the ones who are off camera are following the same set of pace. So as long as you can get some to share, you're going to be fine with figuring out what's going on. Which brings us to the question, how do you do this to share or not share thing? I think the best practice for this is that you don't require students to be on camera. The only time I require students to be on camera is when they do their oral exams, which are 15 minutes. They can schedule them for a time slot that works for them. If they have to, they can borrow somebody's computer. If they don't have a camera on theirs, they can travel to a different site. They can do it from their car. They can do it from wherever they feel comfortable doing it. It's 15 minutes and they choose the time and place that they want to do it from. So that is the only time they have to be on camera with me, is when we're doing their oral exam. Some of them realize suddenly they can do it from their phone, and that's how they do their oral exam, which is totally fine. But there are plenty of legitimate reasons students don't share their cameras, and I think it's important to remember those. Some students have really bad bandwidth, even in our dorms. For the college, some of the dorms just don't have very good bandwidth, and their computers go in and out of their meeting rooms, and so they don't share their cameras because they want to be able to stay in class the whole time and not be dumped out. Some of them have roommates in the room with them that are very distracting, talking a lot, walking behind them, etc. They might just be feeling ill and not want to be on camera. Some of them are having a lot of anxiety right now, and it just makes it worse. Some of them don't want you to see their living space because it might be an absolute mess, or it might be kind of shabby, and they just don't want anybody else in the class to see it. And then legitimately, sometimes their computers don't have a camera or a working camera. I'm sure you've all experienced it when some part of your computer stops working and it takes you a while to figure out how to get it to work again. And that is happening to students as well. So I think we have to be mindful that there are plenty of legitimate reasons students choose to not share their camera. They are not all sinister reasons, like they're just not going to participate. They're legitimate reasons. So there are ways you can nudge students into sharing their camera if they feel comfortable. One, you can ask nicely. You could tell them, I am really struggling here to teach to a room where I can see nobody. I think this will go better for all of us if I can see some of you. I will know whether I'm going too fast or too slow. If I can see whether you look like you're deer in the headlights or whether you're following me and nodding your heads. If I don't see any of you, I'm going to teach this too fast and not realize you have questions. So some of that, just like a personal appeal to why you need to see them. You can say, I think some of you need to see other people too. Like, we're all sitting at home. We, need human contact. You don't need them all to turn on their cameras. You just need some of them to turn on their cameras, right? And so you have to kind of make that appeal. The other thing, though, that helps is to start just asking all the time for them to give you gestures and do things where you need to see them. So, for example, the whiteboards have made it really easy to get people to share their cameras because they share their whiteboards with me, right? So if they want feedback on how they're doing, I need to see their whiteboards, or whatever props you want to have them use. I will ask them to, I'll ask them a yes or no question and ask them to just nod or shake their head, depending on, like, can you see my screen? Just nod or shake your head, So again, I can see what's going on. I can ask them for that thumbs up, or I'm on the right track, or I'm struggling. Hand gesture. I can ask them to give me a hand count. Like if I ask them to list 8 properties, I can say, just show me on camera how many properties you have. Do you have 2? Do you have 4? Do you have 8? And so they'll just show me on screen. It's much easier to just look at a screen of people sharing. And again, it's not everybody in the room, but it's enough to make me feel connected to the students I'm teaching. And I think that is really important to keeping your energy up in a classroom, especially a remote classroom. So then what do we do with the students who don't share a camera? How do you make sure that they are engaged and that they're kind of participating fairly? Because the students who are on camera will get more interaction with you naturally. It would be very easy if you wanted to be a student who just showed up and checked out to do that off camera, right? So how do we fairly engage those students? So I have 3 modifications of activities you can do. So I do a modified 3, 2, 1, go a lot of the time, where the students who don't have cameras, I say, okay, before we press enter, I want all the students who aren't sharing their camera to press enter first. So you guys share your answer first. So they all hit enter. So we see all of their answers. And then once I've seen those answers come in, I say, okay, now everybody else, right? So I'm essentially asking the ones off camera to be the first sharers. And that way I'm sure that they are actually participating in the activity and not just me doing it at the end, right? They get a chance to go first. Another thing you could do is the modified think, pair, share. So I think I mentioned this before as a spoiler alert, that the non-camera students, I'm now designating those as group leaders and sharers. So when they go into a group, the ones, I just look through the breakout rooms and pick out the ones who I know are off camera. Again, this is where it can be helpful to have a list next to you, because you can mark on the list that you have who is not on camera. And then that makes it easier to just choose somebody who's off camera on each group to be the leader. That way they have to engage with the rest of the people in the room, because they're the ones who have to report back to the whole class. And then the third one is to modify the whiteboard work. If they're not sharing their video, then of course you're not seeing their whiteboard work. So one of the things I like to do is just pick some aspect of the whiteboard work that's simple to write down on a chat window and have them all share that. So I'll say, okay, we moved this graph. Can everybody who doesn't have a whiteboard tell me what the new vertex is of the new graph in the chat window? And so they start with that. And we, talk about that for a second. And then I have everybody who has their whiteboard and their camera showing, show their whiteboard. We talk about that. And then I usually show the answer after that. So those are some ways you can bring in the folks who aren't sharing on camera so that they still feel like you are paying attention to them and they need to be paying attention to class, right? The goal here is to make sure everybody's paying attention to class, right? There's another thing I've been using in remote sessions, which I call kind of co-working time with student check-ins. So I have a 2-hour remote session, and I usually only need between an hour and a half for our active learning portion for each topic. And so we start the class every week by having, about 30 to 45 minutes of co-working time. Now the co-working time, I have the students break into a group. They can either be in the viewers who are still watching the videos on the topic. They can be in the collaborators who are actively working on whatever the latest problem set is, or the latest assignment is. These are the people who want to talk out loud, who want to use video and want to interact with each other. For students who have watched all their videos and are already onto problem sets, this is a great use of their time because they get to talk to each other and ask each other questions. And then the third group is the quiet workers. They're done with videos, they're working on problem sets, but they don't actually want to talk to anybody. They just want to sit and work quietly and ask in the chat window if they have a question, right? So the students can pick which room they'd like to be in. And so that'll just kind of, it's kind of like going to work and sitting down and starting your work, right? And for some students, they really need that kind of structure anyways. So they're certainly not going to get all of their work done in this 30 to 45 minutes, but it does bring them into class. It starts them on the work if they haven't been caught up. So it kind of reminds them what there is to do. And then there's another benefit to this, which I think is really valuable. I have a fourth room called instructor help. And in that room, I pull in students that I need to talk to because they're right there in the classroom with me. And in this instructor help room, it's just me and them. So I'll just grab somebody from a room if I need to talk to them about assignments they've missed, low grades they've gotten, an issue that they asked me about in an email. I can pull them in, have a conversation with them, and then assign them back to the room they were in. This is great when you need to schedule extra time for some students on exams. You can pull them into the room and say, okay, can you do it before? Can you do it after? You can get all that stuff done. Sometimes students will ask for, I'll say at the beginning of the session, if you need help about a specific thing, please ask in a private chat to be pulled into the instructor help room, or send me a text that says I need extra help. And then the last thing I use with this time is, since the students are all working for 30 to 45 minutes, I can text the students who are missing in action and say, hey, what's up? You're not here today. Everything okay? And, sometimes they're just ill, or sometimes they haven't woken up yet, but sometimes I can get them into class by the time we do our active learning, right? Which is fairly important for their development, I think. So this kind of gives me a focused office half hour or 45 minutes to really deal with individual student issues. And the rest of the students have some time to just get work done, right? It's not a super, it's not active learning time, but it is time for them to really just focus on math and get math done. So that can be a really valuable use of time. Most importantly, I just kind of wanted to wrap up here, and then I'll take some questions by just saying that remote sessions should be actively engaging students. We should not pull students into remote sessions to lecture to them. If you want to lecture to students, just record videos in small chunks with specific learning objectives for each video so they know which ones they need to watch. You can use them semester after semester. Use your remote sessions for something that is actively engaging. Design it to be actively engaging. Make sure that students are actively working during that time and answering questions and thinking about concepts and working in small groups. And it does take a little bit of time to design those activities. I would say it probably takes me about 1 hour to 90 minutes to design a set of activities for an hour. But once they're designed, I can use them over and over, right? So it's not, the worst thing. And if you are working if you have other teachers who teach the same type of class as you, you can split up the work. And one of you designs, you either split up, I'll design every fourth session, or, something like that. Or one person can design all the remote activities, and another person can design all the problem sets, another person can write all the tests, right? So that there are things you can do to split up the load for doing this the first time. But do keep in mind that if you make a remote teaching deck, you can use that in a face-to-face class. There's no reason you can't, right? And so what you are really doing is designing an active learning class session. And you can use that for a long time and just make small modifications as you go. It's kind of like when we used to write our lecture notes and then pull them out every time we taught the class, right? Now we design these active learning sessions instead. So I'm going to leave it open for some questions and see what we haven't talked about that maybe we can address about remote sessions. Brenda's question, if they hold their whiteboard in front of the camera, it is visible to others. Yeah. So they can all see each other's responses, which is totally fine. When I do teach in the classroom, I usually try to get classrooms with whiteboards around the whole room. And instead of having these handheld whiteboards, they go and stand at whiteboards and work on the problems. And then I can see all of their answers and they can see all of their answers. And it turns out there's you can be hidden in the mob, essentially. As long as everybody's doing it, nobody feels very, a super sense of oh, what if I'm wrong? Because there's I have questions in my decks that every student gets wrong. Or I know that 100% or 95% of the students are going to get it wrong on the first try. So they know that like they might all be wrong, they might all be right, they might be half and half. It doesn't really matter. There's no high stakes. They're not going to get graded down on active learning if they get one wrong. What matters is that they were there and trying, right? So let's see. How do I pull students into the instructor help room? You can actually just go in Zoom, you can just go hover over the student and there's an assign button. And I just assign them to the instructor help room. And then I go join that room with them. So that works just very easily. The new Zoom breakout rooms will let students self-choose a room, but they all have to be upgraded to the latest version of Zoom, which most of them are not. So I still, even though like I name the rooms like viewers, collaborators, quiet workers, instructor help, only maybe like 5 or 10% of my class right now is able to actually go move themselves to a room. I have to move the rest still. So I just go through them. It's kind of like an attendance check-in. I just go through and say like, Cheryl, what room do you want to be in? Carrie, what room do you want to be in? Mohammed, what room do you want to be in? You know, and then they all get a chance to talk to me and let me know. There was another question, where do I get my whiteboards with the graphs on one side? I use a website called Marker Board People, all one word. It like actually goes to a different URL now. I can't remember what their new name is, but if you just search for Marker Board People, you'll find it. These are nice, like 11 by 14, I think. I'll show you how big they are. They're like 11 by 17, maybe 11 by 14, and they're white on one side and they have graphs on the other side. So they're super nice. I think the cost per board is about $8. And I know that some schools have actually just talked to their bookstore about breaking them up. You can get them in sets of 30 or sets of 100, and some bookstores have, some people have talked to their bookstores about just breaking them up into whiteboard marker pen, whiteboard marker eraser, and just selling them off for $10 each, you know, so the students can just buy them as supplies too. Certainly you can also just send them to Target or what else would be Target, office supply store or something, to just buy a little whiteboard of their own. So if you don't have students who are going to campus to buy things, they could certainly do it that way too. You can get little whiteboards on Amazon for under $10 at Target, et cetera. So it's a really, really nice solution for moving their attention off the other things they're distracted by on their screen to actually paying attention to your class. And I think it can work in lots of different subjects, anywhere where you ask questions. You know, as long as you can think of questions to ask, they can write down, brainstorm ideas on a whiteboard to share. Right? They can draw things, they can make diagrams, all sorts of stuff. Thanks, Moira, for sharing they have a nice new URL. I just can't remember it because I've been ordering from Marker Board People for a long time. But yeah, these work really well. I've been using the same set of whiteboards for years in the classroom. So, and actually, again, you know, how did I get this for remote classes? It's because I already used them in face-to-face classes. So all I did now was send students home with one instead of always just having them in class. Because as an adjunct, I don't get like the latest and greatest classroom. I get like the last choice classroom on campus, which very rarely has whiteboards around it like I would like. And so I had to come up with a solution for, well, what if there are no whiteboards in the room? How will I duplicate that activity? And I have them do their work on whiteboards and then just hold them up like in class, right? And I would actually use this in socially distanced classrooms right now as well. I would issue every student a whiteboard. They would bring their whiteboard to and from class with them. So it's always their germs on it, always their germs on their pen. And in class, I could have them hold up their whiteboards to me so I can see how their work is doing, because I can't walk around near them to see how their work is doing, right? So I would use these same whiteboards in class, and I use them in normal semesters too. So a lot of these techniques, again, they're just coming from good active learning practices in general, right? So learning how to do some of these things is just going to carry through to your normal teaching when this is all over, and I think you'll feel really comfortable doing it. Let's see, other questions that you have.
I have a question. I'm teaching a larger class, like 188 first year engineers doing calculus. And, you know, I have TAs, but they do recitation. So I don't have help during my class session. And I feel like, I mean, I want to be doing it synchronously. And so, I mean, so I'm torn. I mean, I try and make they are lectures, but they're, you know, they're interactive. I'm using polling questions. I'm, you know, writing out the examples. It's not all pre-printed, but so I feel, I mean, yes, I could pre-record things, but I feel like I do want that synchronous session. And so are there any other things, you know, any other things that I could do to make it more active, given that I don't have, you know, the support to be running breakout rooms? And
Yeah. So one of the things I do with my recorded lessons is I actually I give them what I call guided notes, which are like, are notes with spaces in them, right? And so if they want a complete set of notes for class, a complete like text for class, they have to watch the videos to get it. And they fill in a lot as they go. And the videos actually will say, now pause this and try this problem first, and then see how you did when you're done, right? And probably not all of them do that, but plenty of them do, right? And so I try to make the videos that are recorded more interesting to watch. And one of the carrots on that is they can use their notes on a test. So they can use those guided notes they take on a test. If they take no guided notes, then they have no guided notes to use, right? So that's one of the ways I get them to watch that. And so then what I'm trying to do in class is to just have them actively practice a lot. And it shouldn't actually matter how big the class is. You could still do something like the whiteboard activities with a large class. You just aren't going to see all of them every time. You're just going to scroll to a different window, students who's sharing and things like that. But I think it's super important for calc students, for math students, for chemistry students, physics students to put pen to paper and try things on their own, not just short questions, but long questions, right? Questions that involve, you know, solving an entire scenario problem, right? So I think the class size isn't as much of an issue until you have to grade things, right? And so, yes, taking attendance in a big class is going to be a little harder. There are little add-ins you can often get for these platforms that will kind of give you attendance for the platform. Sometimes it's a matter of like Googling and looking around for exactly how people do it. But you know, I would say I've used like whiteboard techniques in classes, in math classes for, I don't know, like 15 years. And it just seems to be the thing that really helps it turn it into a more active experience and more like, oh, we're actually doing things in class. Most students will guess at a multiple choice question or a polling question without ever putting pen to paper. So it's kind of this like forced activity to have the whiteboard. And we've actually been talking on our campus about coordinating amongst the STEM faculty so that we just say every student has to have a whiteboard. And then once they have one, they can use it in all of their classes, right? Not just their math class. So as long as they've got one from some class, they're good, right? And then they can use it in chemistry and physics and math and engineering and you know, computer programming and wherever else it might be appropriate to have one for class. Well, we're out of time. So hopefully you picked up a couple new things here. And I'm sure we'll do another update in a few more semesters with some more. But I hope that can help you have a more active experience and not be feeling despair when you're meeting with your classes. It's really important that you feel that same connection with your class that you normally feel. If you're not having that, then you're not there yet on getting the level of activity and interaction that you need, right? And there's nothing wrong with asking the students to help you get that, because the class will be better for them if you have it, right? So don't be afraid to ask. All right, well, I'll see you next time.